Department of Interfaith Relations and Community Partnerships. I want to welcome all of you to tonight's dinner dialogue, Using Your Voice for Good. Whether this is your first time at an IM event or you are a familiar friend, we welcome you and remind all of you that Dinner Dialogues is part of an IM Dinner Dialogue project and provides opportunities to learn about Houston's diverse faith communities and to share your experiences and listen to the experiences of others. Since their inception in 2007 as the Amazing Faiths Project, Dinner Dialogues has been a centerpiece program of interfaith relations and now the Department of Interfaith Relations and Community Partnerships at Interfaith Ministries. The dialogues have grown and changed over the years. From 2007 to 2012, dialogue cards were used as a catalyst for conversations, and conversations were hosted in individual homes across the Houston area. From 2012 to 2015, each dinner focused on a particular religious tradition, with individuals and families from that particular faith tradition serving as host. In more recent years, we began hosting dinner and dialogue at our IM building, where conversations began engaging in the cross-section of religion and society. And today, in our present COVID-19 setting, there is a little less dinner that we're serving, but our dialogue happens virtually for all of us to enjoy in just the same manner. Clearly, there have been many different formats and venues for our dinner dialogue. However, what has remained constant are our goals and aspirations. Our goals of creating a safe learning environment for people to enjoy the hospitality of our diverse Houston community, where all guests are encouraged to speak and participate openly. And our goal of facilitating mutual understanding among people of different faiths, traditions, and backgrounds. And last, that we foster an atmosphere where new friendships can be made. One thing that Dinner Dialogues has always been also is a free space from any kind of proselytizing or attempts to convert anyone from one religion to another. Or it's free from criticizing the beliefs or faiths of others or venting frustrations or previous bad experiences with a religious tradition or institution. Rather, in tonight's dinner dialogue specifically, we have a goal to give you the tools to avoid these very situations of frustration, and rather to feel more comfortable having tough conversations with courtesy and respect, and an understanding of living into your values through meaningful conversation tools. And also, we hope that after tonight, you have learned how vulnerable conversations can be very uncomfortable, but they are ultimately leads us to growth. It is this growth that becomes a pillar of strength for each of us, where we might utilize our values and use our voice for good for the greater community. Again, we welcome all of you tonight to this event. Please add your name and your organization that you're a part of to the chat box and introduce yourself to everyone. Maybe you'll make new friends and be asked yourself to come and speak to one of their events. Feel free to take pictures during the event, whatever you might be doing, whatever family members are watching along with you. It's fun to get those pictures because we're so distant. It's always fun to see how you've been experiencing what we've worked so hard on. And you can send those to kmabry@imgh.org. I think we'll have that in the chat box for you so you can send your pictures there. And please know that this evening's event is being recorded, so we will have that available at a later time. And with all that, I would like to introduce you to the chair of our Dinner Dialogue Committee, Ms. Yvonne Harris, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kim. And thank you for all of your work in planning this event. I appreciate you. Hi, everyone. So glad that you're spending your evening with us, whether it's your Taco Tuesday or Takeout Tuesday. We're just glad to see your smiling faces. 2020 has been a year like no other. This year has presented many challenges on a global scale and on an individual basis. And while there have been tough times experienced by us all, I'm so thankful to my family, friends, and many of you participating with us tonight
No, it's not
who have chosen Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Who have chosen to see the good in these times, to be a light in dark places, and to be a voice to the voiceless. Many of us find it necessary to speak out on issues related to COVID-19, the death of George Floyd, and current economic conditions. And some of us may need help finding our voice and tapping into its authentic power. We may need to learn or relearn how to share our perspectives in ways that advocate for positive, sustainable change. We may need to learn how to channel the power of our voices to be effective leaders for our community, our businesses, and our families. And as some of us look inward, we may need to discover how to use our voice to create personal boundaries and the courage to pursue our true passions and purpose. So again, and with all that said, thank you for joining us tonight for this virtual dinner dialogues as we focus on how to use your voice for good, featuring Joni Goodman, who is our speaker tonight, and just such an inspiration and such a great partner and supporter of Interfaith Ministries for being here tonight. And Joni is one of the first trained facilitators for Dr. Brené Brown's Dare to Lead program. So drawing from the tenets and the principles from Dare to Lead, Joni will help us understand that the hurt the world is facing right now and experiencing actually serves as an opportunity for us to find our courage and use our voices for the greater good. Now, before I start the program and turn it over to Joni, I don't want to miss the opportunity to extend huge gratitude to Interfaith Ministries of Greater Houston. Interfaith Ministries has met the challenges that COVID-19 has brought to our community by providing increased support through Meals on Wheels and other programs that serve as a lifeline to so many. And of course, thank you to Interfaith for its steadfast commitment to the Dinner Dialogue Project, which brings us together tonight. This project provides the opportunity to learn about Houston's diverse faith communities, engage with people from diverse backgrounds, share experiences, and listen to the experiences of others with the aim to inspire further interfaith dialogue, collaboration, and service in our communities. So with all that said, Joni, I turn it over to you. And again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. And I have to say to everyone tonight that the fact that I'm even here was a using your voice for good moment. So my network consists of a lot of wonderful people, one of which I know is on the line here this evening, Arquella Hargrove, who is also Dare to Lead trained. And she has introduced me to Yvonne and then connected me with the folks here at Interfaith Ministries. So I express my deep gratitude for the opportunity to be with you all this evening. So I think that this is a new term that we actually should add to the dictionary now. We used to call it housekeeping whenever we assimilated together about, you know, where's the bathroom, where's the coffee, that sort of thing. And now that we're meeting virtually, we have Zoom keeping. So I'm sure that this may not be new to you, but just for those who may not be as accustomed to using Zoom, I want to acquaint you with some of the features that we'll be using this evening. Now, you'll see here, there's a panel that goes along the bottom of your screen, and that is where you can mute and unmute yourself. We ask that everybody keep yourself on mute right now, but obviously this is a dialogue, so we want to hear from you. But because there are several folks on the line tonight, and to prevent us from talking over one another, we will use the raise hand, or you can also use the little reaction button, the clap hand or the thumbs up, whenever you want to speak, whenever we open up the floor. So that way we can call and be able to call on and engage everybody and be able to hear your voice. Your video is optional. And we understand that we're all coexisting and cohabitating with four-legged friends as well as two-legged family members, perhaps. So if somebody walks by in the background, or if you accidentally unmute and we hear a doorbell or a dog bark, don't sweat it, all right? This is part of working virtually now. You already are familiar with the chat panel, but we will be using the chat panel as well. I also want to ask you to, if you're on your laptop or a tablet or you have a smartphone handy, we're going to be using a program called Mentimeter to add some engagement to the program beyond the chat feature tonight. So you can open up another browser window on your tablet or your computer, or you can also use your smartphone. And I'll give you some instructions for that. I just wanted to set everybody up for success. All right, so can everybody give me a thumbs up? Find your thumbs up, so use that reaction button. Let's see, are we getting some, or you can do an actual thumbs up as well. All right, I'm seeing some thumbs up. Awesome. Great work, everybody. Okay, so the tenets and the premise of the Dare to Lead book, and therefore the Dare to Lead workshop, is from this Teddy Roosevelt quote. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. So in order for us to be able to take a stand and use our voice for good, it takes the courage for us to go into what we metaphorically are calling here the arena. And sometimes when we go in there with the best intentions of using our voice for good, it doesn't always go the way that we planned. And we brutally say we failed, all right? But when you have those stumbling moments, it takes courage to be able to go in there in the first place and to have good intentions and to try your best. But when we fail, we have to be able to get back up. And in order to go in there in the first place, we have to be vulnerable. And so we're going to talk about vulnerability. But the one thing I want you to take away from this Teddy Roosevelt quote is, if the folks in your sphere of influence are not willing to go into the arena with you or themselves, then this is a little brutal, but then we're not super interested in their feedback because they're not using their voice for good and they're not realizing that this is part of the experience to be vulnerable. All right, so some of you are thinking, wow, that landed, whoa, that was a zinger. But if you're not willing to go into the arena and be vulnerable and have those failure moments whenever you have the best intentions, then as Brené says in her book, then I am not open to or interested in your feedback. All right. So what we're going to be talking about today is how do we prevent it to getting to that place where we don't go into the arena, where we're not willing to be vulnerable. And so one of those ways that prevents us from going into the arena is what I like to call gatekeeping behaviors. All right, so there are these mental voices in our head that say, no, you can't do it, or you shouldn't do it, or you shouldn't say that, or you shouldn't talk to that person, or you shouldn't stand for that. And those are what I call gatekeeping behaviors, all right? So the first little exercise that I'm gonna share with you and then I'm gonna ask everyone to do, and we're gonna use, so if you have your tablet, your smartphone, that other browser window, get that ready to go, all right? So we're gonna do an activity called permission slips. And permission slips, as I said, are really to get those gatekeeping behaviors out of the way. And so here's what a permission slip is. Some of you are thinking, my goodness, you're taking me way back to the school age days where I had to get my parents to sign off on the permission slip. Well, this is a little bit like that, except for it's you that's going to be signing off, all right? So the permission slip activity, and this is something we're going to do together, but you can also use after this program. So what is it that you need to give yourself permission to do, feel, or not do or feel in order to fully show up authentically as yourself for the discussion this evening? All right, so I'm going to say that again. What is it that you need to give yourself permission to do or not do or feel or not feel in order to fully show up as your authentic self this evening? All right, so I'm going to share my permission slip with you, and then we're going to take a brief pause and give you an opportunity to jot down your permission slip as well. So mine is to be proud of myself and to open up, and I am a recovering perfectionist. So to know that done is better than perfect, and not only to open myself up, but to remain open-minded to others that share with me. And this is another really difficult one for me, is we're all so busy and thinking about the next thing. So to be fully present, all right? So what is it you need to do or not do, feel or not feel, in order to authentically show up and be present and participate as fully you this evening in this dinner dialogue? All right, so I'm gonna just do a screen shift here. And while I'm doing that, I'm gonna invite you to grab your smart device, your smartphone, your tablet, all right? And bring up a browser and go to the website menti.com. And would Greg or someone, would you mind to put that website in the chat? That might make it a little easier for folks to click on. It's www.menti.com. All right, that's the first step. And then once we get there, there's a code to enter. All right, and that code is 820653. All right, so once you get in there, you're gonna see the same thing that's on the screen, to type your first name and enter your permission slip. So take a moment, get set up. I'm seeing some names appear on the screen, but go ahead and enter your permission slip. So what is it you need to, besides your name, what is it you need to give yourself permission to do or not do, feel or not feel this evening to fully show up? I'm going to pause and give everybody a moment to do that. I'm seeing lots of names appear up on the screen. There we go. Now we're starting to see some permission slips show up as well. Great. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. So MJ says present and stop working, release guilt from being away from family. Jonathan says to be able to make mistakes and to accept criticism and have it affect future action. Jackie, you don't need to save everyone. It's okay. Huh. Kathy, focus on this. Tune out TV in the other room. Yes. That's very hard when we're all at home a lot these days. Judy, try to focus on the presenter and not listen to my son talking in the background. Yes, give yourself permission if you need to take a moment and take care of your son, absolutely. To listen and not feel like I have to respond. Callista saying it's okay to fail and it's okay to not have an answer. Jerry, to use my ears in proportion to my mouth. Yes, I always say God gave us 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth for a reason. Don't multitask. Listen even when I don't know even when I know the other person is wrong. Ooh, that's a difficult one. Give myself permission to be clear. Clear is kind, yes, and unclear is unkind. Gail, to be fully present, be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Learn from guilt and failure. B. Watkins, listen, react, and feel. Take this time out. Nadia, not be afraid of failing. Present, stop worrying about work. Listen with intent, be present, be aware. Learn from everyone. Check self-judgment at the door, embrace vulnerability. Close other websites, be in the moment, be present, listen with open ears, be open-minded. Not worry about dinner, listen, don't hide how I may feel. Be ready to listen, not worry about being articulate. Slow down, learn at least 3 new things, great. And then Mandy says to be myself. Yes, awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing. And here's what I'm gonna ask you to do. I know that you shared this on the screen, but I invite you to use this on a daily basis. If it helps. And even they say it takes 3 weeks to make or break a habit. So try doing this for 3 weeks, put it on an actual Post-it note and put it somewhere where you can see it as a reminder of what you're giving yourself permission to do. And then you can take this back to your congregation, your small groups, whatever activity groups that you are a part of, and use this for everyone else to acknowledge what they're giving themselves permission to do, just as we did this evening. So thanks everybody for that. All right, so the research that Dr. Brené Brown did was around the ability to be a daring and courageous leader. And I know some of you are thinking, well, I'm retired, or I don't have a supervisor or a manager title. What are we talking about this leader business here? Well, we're gonna hang with me here because we're gonna talk about exactly what a leader means. But in the research, it was first thought that either you have these skills or you don't. You can be a daring or courageous leader, or you're not born that way, all right? And so the research proved that this was precisely wrong, all right? That this was a myth, and the myth was busted, because these 4 skill sets that are a part of courageous and daring leadership are actually all teachable, measurable, and observable. And those 4 skill sets are rumbling with vulnerability, living into our values, braving trust, and learning to rise. So we are going to just dip our toe in the water to each one of these 4 skill sets and give you a little bit of a taste of some activities of how you can apply these skill sets. But the full program actually does a deep dive into a self-awareness journey for you to tackle each one of these skill sets. And actually the majority of the book and the program is based off of this first skill set of rumbling with vulnerability. So we're going to talk quite a bit about that. So then what gets in the way of us not doing these things, of not rumbling with vulnerability, of knowing what our values are but not living into those, of when we fail not being able to get back up again, and not having trust or having a breach or break of trust with someone? And so these are the barriers to courage, all right? And so having tough conversations, well, that's just it. They're tough conversations to have. And so therefore we don't do it. We don't speak up whenever we feel like it might be a negative conversation, but it's actually an opportunity for us to use our voice for good and to create a bridge instead of a barrier, all right? To express our fears and feelings, to deal with trust that might be corroded, to not get stuck in setbacks when we do have the best intentions and a conversation doesn't go as we planned, to get stuck in that setback. Lack of innovation, being open to new ideas. Many people mentioned that, being open and present. Problem solving and action bias. This is a big one as of late. Inclusivity, diversity, and equity. So if it wasn't enough for us to have a pandemic that we've all been operating in, but also what has risen to the surface is social injustice. And so it has to start inward with us in order for us to be able to apply this outwardly to what's going on in the world. Shame and blame. All right, so I will give you the spoiler alert here. The antidote to shame and blame is empathy. And that has been something that we've all needed to have a lot of with ourselves, but also with one another. And then not having clarity around values or other people's values. And I already mentioned perfectionism. So there have been a lot of tough conversations that we've observed in the media, but we've also observed with our friends, with our family, in our congregations, about what happened with George Floyd. I mean, it's an election year this year. And if you think about 4 years ago, how controversial things were then, it's escalated even more. The civil discourse. So rooting ourselves in the foundation of these 4 skill sets can help us to be able to use our voice for good and be confident and know that if we mess it up, that we can circle back and do over. We can get back up. We can have our support section and self-compassion and self-love to help others and help ourselves to get back up again. All right, so I mentioned that we were going to dive into vulnerability. So here's the definition of what vulnerability is, all right? It is the emotion that we experience during times of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. So I want to invite you to just take a moment and think about your day-to-day. And is there anything that you do that doesn't involve some bit of uncertainty, risk, or emotional exposure? I mean, think about that. Is there anything, work, at home, with your church, with volunteer organizations, is there anything that doesn't involve some bit of uncertainty, level of risk, or emotional exposure? If you think about it, I don't think there's a whole heck of a lot, all right? And so, unbeknownst to us, we're being vulnerable every day with everything that we're doing. Vulnerability is also not about winning or losing, and it is having the courage to show up when we cannot control the outcome. All right? And so honestly, the only thing that we can truly control is this right here. All right? When we are having a conversation with someone, we can't control how what we say is going to land on them. And so therefore that takes vulnerability for us to even say it or even to have that conversation. But what we can control then is ourselves. And then if we are in a good space, then we in turn can help that other person if they are struggling or are not in a good space. So how do we go about doing that? How do we go about being vulnerable and actually having a conversation and being intentional about using our voice for good? Well, that is by having what we call a rumble. Remember, the skill is rumbling with vulnerability. All right, so the rumble is a process, and then I'm going to give you some tools for how to go about having a rumble. So could I get someone to volunteer? So either raise your hand or give me a little reaction to read this definition of a rumble for us. I'm looking to see if we've got any brave soul who'd be willing to. Oh, I see, Fatima.
Hi. Okay. Rumble is a discussion, conversation, or meeting defined by a commitment to lean into vulnerability, to stay curious and generous, to stick with the messy middle of problem identification and solving, to take a break and circle back when necessary, to be fearless in owning our parts, and to listen with the same passion with which we want to be heard.
Thank you so much. Wow, there's a lot in having a rumble, right? So we think, it's just having a conversation. Well, it's leaning into that vulnerability, so that uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, to stay curious even when something may not land on us the way we thought it was going to, or when it doesn't land on the other person the way we thought it was going to, and to come from a place of generosity and assuming positive intent, all right? I know we've been taught not to assume, but assuming positive intent, that's gonna help us to be in a better place. And then to stick with the messy middle of the problem, all right? A lot of these conversations that we've been having, you know, the pandemic and wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, and then the social injustice and, you know, how do we even fathom dealing with this or talking to others about this? So sticking with that messy middle of how do we handle this? How do we move past it? How do we deal with grief? All right. And we give our children time out, but sometimes it's us that actually needs to take the time out, to take a break, and then circle back and come back and say, you know what? This conversation isn't going the way I had planned or the way I thought it would go. And I really wanted, I had the best intentions. So why don't we take a pause and then let's circle back to that, maybe this afternoon or tomorrow, or can I call you in an hour? And you know what, this is for me, I need to take a break and get my head right so that I can be present with you. All right. And to be fearless in owning that, hey, it's me. I'm not in a good space today. And so I need to take a break and get myself together. And then this one, we've already started talking about this, to listen with the same passion with which we want to be heard. All right. So we now know what a rumble is. We know what vulnerability is defined as. Now, how do we go about doing this? All right, so these are some phrases or conversation starters that you can utilize in an effort to use your voice for good. So this is a big one, all right? The story I make up, or the story I'm telling myself, is X, all right? So that may be going off in our head, but we never let the other person know about that. All right, so the story I make up, or the story I'm telling myself about this situation, is X. All right, I'm curious about, help me understand. You seem really charged about the children not being able to go back to school the way they normally would. So I'm curious about, tell me more about that. All right, I'm curious about, tell me more about. And then when someone is talking about an experience that is not so positive with someone else, you can certainly listen to that and share with them that that's not my experience, rather than saying, well, you're absolutely wrong. I've never seen that person do that, or I've never heard them say that. All right. So share with them that's not been my experience. Then I'm wondering, help me understand. This is a big one. Help me understand, where are you coming from? I can understand where I'm coming from, but it feels like you're on a completely different island or different continent from me. So help me understand. And then walk me through, how did you arrive at that conclusion? How did you get to that process? And then acknowledging when we both need a timeout. And this is where we may be getting heated, but it is really passion that's coming to the surface. So we're both dug in. Tell me more about your passion around this. And then tell me why this doesn't fit or work for you. And then again, acknowledging when we're working from an assumption, and ask the other person, what their assumption is. And then lastly, sometimes we get in a conversation and we don't even realize what problem we're trying to solve. All right. So this ties back to those barriers to courage. And this is a way that we can get to building that bridge. All right. Of being able to have that tough conversation, to be able to rebuild that trust that could be eroding when we have conversations around the social unrest that we've been experiencing, diversity, equity, and inclusion, coming at it from a place of using our voice for good. All right, so as a reminder, these are the 4 skill sets, and we have really just started touching the surface of rumbling with vulnerability. So what was also found in the research is that what gets in the way of us being a daring and courageous leader is not fear, it's armor. All right, we've talked about those barriers to courage, but knowing that it isn't fear necessarily, it is armor that gets in the way of us being that daring and courageous leader and using our voice for good. And so here are some of the ways that we armor up. And so perfectionism, which you've heard me mention a couple times tonight, scarcity, always knowing, cynicism, having power over instead of power through or power to, weaponizing fear, and hustling for our worth. And so here, when I saw this image, it made me reflect on number one, the things that we do that keep us from using our voice for good. But then it also tied me to some scriptures. So Ephesians 6:11 says, put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. And then Ephesians 6:13, therefore take up the full armor of God so that you will be able to resist in the evil day, and having done everything to stand firm. All right, so not coming from a place of scarcity, but coming from a place of abundance. And instead of armoring up to protect ourselves in a not healthy way, to put on that full armor of God and to not be a cynic, to not use a power over position when we're attempting to use our voice for good, but use rather power to and power through. And don't use fear to weaponize. There's been a lot of that that's been happening in what we see on the media, and that does nothing good for us, for our anxiety, for our nervous system. You know, fear, I like to use fear as a 4-letter acronym of false evidence appearing real. Anytime I feel fear, I really want to check myself, because the other thing that happens is in the absence of data or facts, the brain is wired neurobiologically to desire, want, and create and make up a story. All right. So when we don't know for sure, and we don't, like what's happening with the pandemic, we don't necessarily have an end in sight. So all of a sudden, we are making up stories about this is never going to end. I'm never going to be able to go out to a restaurant. I'm never going to be able to convene fully with my congregation again, except for virtually. All right. So those are stories that we're telling ourselves. We don't have any factual data yet that says that we're not going to be able to do that forever, but our brain is neurobiologically wired to make up that story. And so the other one is here that gets in the way of us using our voice for good is hustling for our worth. So when we're looking for validation, rather than knowing that who we are and the values that we stand for is enough. All right. Okay, so the first skill set that we have been diving into is rumbling with vulnerability. And down here at the bottom, sometimes we just have to embrace the suck. All right. So the fact that we have been, you know, locked up in our homes since March, we've had the great pause in 2020. We have to embrace the suck. And I will tell you that as an extrovert, this has been really, really hard for me. I miss people. I miss hugs. I miss being able to convene with all of you in person rather than virtually, although I am super, super grateful for the technology to be able to do this. So if we resist it rather than embrace it, it's hard for us to move forward. And you cannot get to courage without rumbling with vulnerability. So we've talked about vulnerability, we've talked about what a rumble is, the process, and then I gave you some tools for how to use your voice for good, to be able to have those tough conversations, to be able to build that bridge to corroding trust, to talk about topics of social unrest and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and come from a place of good intention and know that it may not go exactly as you planned. And that's okay. We're going to circle back and we're going to stay in that messy middle and we're going to get through it. All right. So I would like to open up the chat panel at this point to, I know I've mentioned a couple things that have happened in 2020, but I would like to hear from all of you. What are some opportunities that are crying out to you for using your voice for good or using a voice for good right now? So I'm going to open up the chat panel here and give everybody a moment to share. So what are opportunities that are currently crying out for a voice for good right now? So I invite you to find the chat panel, take a moment, think. What in your world is crying out for using our voice for good. All right, breaking the divisiveness in our country. Fear, political polarization, the need for race unity and social justice, conversation and anti-racism, reopening churches for in-person worship, students who must learn from home needing to access technology, conversations around immigration, immigration reform, international relations, working with students who have disabilities and these students are left behind in the schools, securing funding for social needs like food, rent, survival, people who won't wear masks or social distance, wealth inequality, helping the shut-ins or seniors, being the voice of calm during the storm, preventing more people from losing their homes due to the inability to pay their rent, their mortgage, commitments in couples, erosion of democracy, healthcare access, believe in the science and the data. See a here for people who don't wear masks, caring about others by wearing a mask. Yeah, all things COVID, right? Yes. So there are tons of things right now that are happening in 2020, but I think if we reflect on the past, there were also many opportunities that we could have used our voice for good that may have prevented us from where we are today in the world. And I know we can't undo history, but we can learn from it. And so we can apply this right now in the present day to make the future look different. So thank you for sharing those in the chat and for sharing what's on your heart as far as opportunities that are crying out for us to use our voice for good. And we've already given you some tools, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some additional things that can help support you in going out there and being able to have these tough conversations and do it with intention of using your voice for good. All right, so the next skill set that we're going to lean into, and I'm going to invite you to pull that smartphone or that tablet or that other browser nearby, have that nearby with you again. We're going to go to the same Menti platform, so if you left that open and didn't close out, it'll just repopulate and you won't have to enter the code again. If you closed out of it, it's okay. We'll give the website and the code again. But we're going to talk about living into our values, which is the second skill set. And so I know this screen is very busy, all right, but this is going to be a personal reflection exercise for you to think about looking at this list of words, and we're going to send this handout to you in the chat, all right, so you can actually download it because I'm going to move off of this screen here in a moment. But I'm going to give everybody a few moments to take a look at these words, all right, and identify what your top 2 values are. Okay, now I'm not boxing you in and saying that you have to use one of these words on the screen. You can write in your own, all right? Another question that I often get about this exercise of identifying your top 2 values is, do you mean personally or professionally? Do you mean at work or at church? Do you mean at home or at church? Or do you mean when I'm with the volunteer organization that I support? I mean, period, full stop. There's no difference. Your top 2 values are your top 2 values, all right? So on the screen here, you see the list of words. That handout should be coming to you through the chat. And here's what we're going to do. As you are looking through this list of words, all right, I would like for you to choose no more than 2, your top 2 values, all right? These values are based on the beliefs that are most important to you. They help you to navigate out of darkness and to help find your way when you're in that tunnel or you've fallen down in the well. And they fill you with a feeling of purpose. So as you are looking at these words, and it's really, really difficult and challenging, so I'm going to give you all a little bit more time than we did with the permission slips, all right? Just a few minutes longer. It's really, really challenging to narrow it down to 2, all right? But if you ask yourself these questions when you get narrowed down to 6 or 8 or 10 words, does this define me? Is this a representation of who I am when I'm at my best? And is this a filter for me when I need to make a hard decision or have a hard conversation? All right. So I'm going to leave this up on the screen. All right. You should have the handout that has the list of words. And so I invite you just to take a few moments, pause, reflect, select your top 2 values, and then after about 5 minutes, I'm going to open up Menti again, where everyone our top 2 values, and so that we gratitude to everyone for what they stand for and what their guidepost is. All right, so I'm going to set a timer here and let us go for 5 minutes to identify what our values are. Okay, so Karen, above your message and in the chat, you should see a values handout that you can just click on that download button and you'll be able to open up the list of words. Okay, so the instructions are looking at the values handout or defining your own words to choose your top 2 values, okay? So these are words that define you, that are representation of who you are when you're at your best, and they can help you, they're a filter for you whenever you are going to make a hard decision or have a difficult conversation. They fill you with purpose and meaning. They are based on the beliefs that are most important to you, and they help find your way in the dark. Okay, so the value words, I took them off of the screen. I can toggle back to them, but the handout is also available to you in the chat that you can download. So I'm going to flip back just so those who may not be able to download that handout, you can see the words on the screen. And we've got about 2.5 minutes remaining, and you'll still have some time once the time is up, because I'm going to switch over to Menti and allow folks to enter in their values. So it'll take a little bit of time for everyone to do that. Apologies for the difficulty downloading, and perhaps after this as a follow-up, we can get that handout out to you so you can have it as a reference going forward as well.
Joni, you might want to unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Oh,
Joni,
I'm so sorry. I thought I had unmuted myself. I'm so sorry. I was just letting you know that I'm going to open up Menti in about a minute. So it will still be the permission slip slide right now. And so I'll give you the green light on that. And thank you for having grace and allowing everyone to work at their own pace to come up with their values. And the Menti code is the same. It's menti.com 820653. You want to get that set up. You're going to see the permission slip, but that's an indicator that you're in the right place. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and toggle off of the screen, just a heads up for everyone, and I'm going to go back to Menti. And give me just a second here to get this one up. Okay, so Menti is open now, and you can type your first name just as you did before, and then list your top 2 values along with your name. So that's menti.com, MENTI.com. The code is 820653. All right, so we're seeing faith and love. Jonathan is collaboration and logic. Lynn is grace and collaboration. Karen is love and family. Yvonne is family and grace. Peggy is collaboration and usefulness. Shahin is integrity and generosity. I'm going to pause the scrolling here. Give me just a second. Nadia is kindness and trust. NJ is love and grace. V. Watkins is love and family. Nazar is teamwork and contribution. Kelly is spirituality and interconnectedness plus love. Kathy is harmony and legacy. Jody is friendship and collaboration. We've got authenticity and giving back. Authenticity and connection, integrity and making a difference, intuition and authenticity, family and making a difference, equality, usefulness, family and trust. Awesome. Great work. All right, I'm going to let that go for just a moment so we can continue to see new ones popping up on the screen here. Making a difference and patience. Awesome. Faith and justice. Unconditional love and not taking on more than I need. Perseverance and future generations. Authenticity and integrity. Family and trust. Awesome. Thank you everyone for sharing. I'm going to flip back here to the presentation. Okay, so it's one thing for us to have identified these 2 words as our top 2 values. But if you'll remember, the skill set is living into our values. All right, so now we need to take those 2 words and how do we actually operationalize those? How do we actually operationalize our values? And so these are my top 2 values. So authenticity and gratitude are my top 2 values. And I want to share with you a way that I lived out my values. So one of the organizations that I support and am a member of, given the nature of the work that I do, is the Association for Talent Development. It is a national organization that also has local chapters. And so I had the honor and privilege to actually be the president of the ATD Houston chapter in 2019. And this was my board of directors. And you see lots of diversity, not only in look, but in backgrounds and skill sets. And it was just really an amazing team and group. And so every year we have a leadership conference in the fall, and it's typically around the September-October timeframe. And so this is when we typically acknowledge the incumbent board for their service and announce the new board. So this would have been last year in September, and I was acknowledging my board, and we were announcing the new board for 2020. Well, at our July board retreat, I had the board do exactly what you did, an exercise of identifying what their top 2 values were. And so in my gratitude and appreciation for their service and their leadership and their hard work, I gave all of them a leather padfolio that had their name and their top 2 values on it. And so that was a really great example of me living into my value of showing up authentically as who I am, giving them permission to show up authentically as who they are and stand for what they believe in, but then also express my gratitude to them. Well, here's what can happen when you live into your values. So I want to draw your attention to this gentleman. Hopefully you can see my cursor moving on the screen. His name is Adam, and he was our VP of Finance. And so if any of you have a financial background, this is not meant to put a stereotype or anything like that. But Adam, given the finance nature of his role and just who he was as a person, he was definitely there and attending our board meetings, but I wouldn't say that he was what I would call an active participant. He would speak up when spoken to, and that was about it. You didn't hear from him other than if he needed something, you know, if our budget was about to be compromised or something like that. Otherwise, he was just present more in a passive way. Well, in September is when I gave them these padfolios, and shortly after that, Adam's grandmother passed away, and they were very close. And I received this note out of the blue from Adam. So we, as a chapter, sent a nice peace lily to the funeral. Some of us attended, but he sent us this note. The speech I delivered at my grandmother's rosary and again at the funeral was delivered from the gray portfolio you provided to us with our personal values, mine being family and responsibility. Before walking up to the podium, I read and reflected on those words from the portfolio, and it absolutely helped give me the strength to deliver the eulogies with confidence. Thank you for making those gifts. A number of people asked me about the portfolio, and I was proud to share with them how that came about. They were impressed with the organization, the leadership, and the idea, the activity of selecting, focusing on the 2 words that most represent our own personal values. I was absolutely blown away and floored. And as if that wasn't enough, if you look at Adam's values were family and responsibility. So he was up for re-election to serve a 2nd term on the board. And given his personal life with children, his work life, he actually lives in Clear Lake, but his company is in Chicago, so he did a fair amount of traveling. And being in service on the board was taking him away from time with his family. So he made the difficult decision to say that he did not want to re-up in a full board position, but he still would like to serve in leadership and be a director for us. And so he's still a finance director for us. But it was because of this exercise of living into my values, him living into his values, that he was able to make that tough decision, but then also use his voice for good. As I mentioned, you barely heard from him. And then this happened. So this is what can happen for you if you live into your values. And so I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of this leader word that's mentioned throughout this. It's in the book. And a leader is actually anyone, so no title necessary here, is anyone who takes the time to discover and develop the potential in people. All right, so all of us are leaders. And daring leaders who live into their values are never silent about hard things. All right. We go with the best intention to use our voice for good, even when it's hard and even when it's a tough conversation. The 3rd skill set is braving trust. And I know that this is one of Yvonne's favorite sayings, is clear is kind, unclear is unkind. All right, so we need to have clarity in order to come from a place of kindness, Otherwise, if we're unclear, it's being unkind to ourselves and being unkind to the other person. So the other thing is trust is a big, heavy word. All right. And so braving trust is a difficult thing to do, but braving is actually an acronym. And so this can help trust land be a little bit smoother, help us to be vulnerable, to lean into trust or to rebuild trust if it has corroded. And so braving is the acronym for boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. So boundaries, making sure that you have healthy boundaries with those that you love, with those that you work with those in your congregation. Emotions are okay. Bad behaviors are not. All right. Reliability. Do what you say you're going to do. All right. So here's a great opportunity of using your voice for good to be reliable. Accountability. So don't blame or finger point, and own up and have the courage to say, you know what? I didn't say that right. Or what I meant to say didn't come out exactly as I intended. Or, you know what? I dropped the ball. I'm human after all. This is a big one. Vault, the V. Never share information that is not yours to share. All right. So even if you hear a story from someone, unless they give you permission to share, it's not yours to share. All right. It stays in the vault. So confidentiality isn't a linear thing. All right. It kind of ebbs and flows. But when someone comes to us in an attempt to use their voice for good and shares something that's disheartening with us, we need to be really clear, having clear is kind, unclear is unkind in mind as far as what we do with that information. All right. And if it's not our story, it's not we don't have permission to share it. All right. It needs to stay in the vault unless we ask for that. Integrity is operating from a place of choosing courage over comfort. Non-judgment is pretty self-explanatory, and generosity, we already started talking about this earlier, is that the assumption of positive intent. I'm going to assume the most generous thing I can about this individual, this person, this circumstance, all right? Because that helps me to feel better. When I don't feel good, and I want to feel the best I can, and I want to feel good. So coming from a generous place and assuming positive intent. All right, so braving trust is the acronym of boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. And here's our favorite quote here: clear is kind, unclear is unkind. All right, and last but not least is when we have those arena moments where we try to have that difficult conversation, where we are coming from a place of positive intent to use our voice for good, but the conversation was a tough one and it didn't go exactly the way we had planned for it. And we fall down, we get skinned up. How do we get back up again? That is the skill set of learning to rise. And so this is where we need to check in with ourselves and what is the story that I'm telling myself about the situation, and fact check it. All right, so checking the conspiracies and the confabulations. And so here, who we are is how we lead, but what's in gray? Self-awareness and self-love matter. All right, so this inward work is going to help us to be able to outwardly face and use our voice for good. But we have to take the time and have the courage to go in and sit in the messy middle of things when it doesn't feel exactly right, like what we've been experiencing in 2020. Loads of grief, the pandemic, that I don't know how to go to the grocery store anymore. I feel like I can't leave my house. I see some people that don't have a mask. I don't understand about the kids in school, and what about the people who don't have the technology, and people are losing businesses and homes. This is the difficult things that we've been facing, and it takes vulnerability, and that's not a sign of weakness, in order for us to be courageous in these times and to be able to have conversations about these things and use our voice for good. All right, so in closing, I want to leave you with one last exercise. And so this is a much smaller sheet of paper than the permission slip. This is actually meant to be a 1 inch by 1 inch square, and we call it our square squad. So when we are attempting to live into our values, or we need to have a tough conversation with someone, who is it that we would go to within what I'm going to call a new term for you, our square squad? So who do I reach out to for things that I am most passionate about? When I need to trust and I need to be vulnerable, and I need to get the opinion of someone whose voice really matters to me. Who's in my square squad? And so we need trust to be vulnerable, and we need to be vulnerable in order to build trust. So who is it that I'm going to do this with? So I'm going to give you a moment, and if you have a scrap sheet of paper handy, I'm going to ask that you take that out. If you have a Post-it note, it doesn't have to be a white one. It can be pink or whatever you have. And just take a moment and think about who's in my square squad. Who do I go to with the things that I'm passionate about? Who do I go to when I'm about to be vulnerable and have a tough conversation? Or when there's a trust issue? Or when I need to talk about the social unrest? Or what's transpired in 2020? Or about my kids going back to school? Or when can I get together and meet with my congregation again in person? And this is really hard for me. So I'm going to give you just a minute, and I'm going to stop sharing right now and give everybody a minute to grab their sheet of paper. And after the minute is up, I'm going to ask everyone to hold up their square squad. All right. So you don't necessarily need to see names, just want to see that you did it and know that these are the people that you rely on when you want to be vulnerable and when you want to build those bridges for trust. So I'm going to give everybody a minute. Okay, so I see a question in the chat, and I think that this is probably coming from the list of values regarding what does authenticity and intuition mean. All right, so here's what I'm going to say to that. Okay, we could all go to the dictionary and see what is next to authenticity and what is next to intuition. But what matters most with regard to our values is, what do they mean to you? What do those words mean to you? Okay. All right, so about 30 more seconds and we'll have a little bit of a photo op. So everybody hold up your square squads. Give 30 seconds here. And I see some people are listing them in the chat. Thank you, that's awesome. All right, okay, so on the count of 3, let's everybody hold your square squads up. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Great job. All right, I'm going to flip over to the keep them up, keep them up. I'm going to flip over to this page. All right, keep them up. 1, 2, 3. Okay, awesome. Thank you, everybody. This is to help you. Not only are your values that beacon of light when you're in the dark, but this is who you go to help you when you're having those arena moments, when it feels slippery, it feels icky, it doesn't feel good, it feels stressful, it feels tenuous, this is who you go to in those moments. All right, so last thing here, this is my Square Squad. And here are pictures of the folks in my Square Squad. And yes, my little four-legged furry friend is most definitely in my Square Squad. She hears a lot. My significant other, my friends, my family, they're all who I go to in my Square Squad. So I invite you to take those names that you wrote down and maybe make a little billboard or a background on your screen that has your Square Squad on there as a reminder when you get in those moments that are stressful and you feel like you want to go with the best intention to use your voice for good. So lastly, here is another good process that comes from another book besides Dare to Lead, which is called Fierce Conversations. Some of you might be familiar with this. So in using your voice for good process, identify what the most pressing issue is. Make sure that you clarify that. So clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Determine what the impact is. Determine the future implications. Examine your personal contribution to the issue. What do I own in this? And then describe the ideal outcome. And lastly, what is our commitment to action? So some of those items and opportunities that you brought up as far as a way to use our voice for good, or crying out for us to use our voice for good, here's another way along with those Rumble tools that you can use to have that conversation. So we're going to move into Q&A here, but I want to let everyone know that's attending tonight that we barely just dipped our toe in the water to this work that Brené Brown has done. So I have a workshop that is coming up that's 2 days that dives a lot deeper into each one of the 4 skill sets. It's a big self-awareness, self-love journey for you. If you're interested, please send a message and you can go to the website. If we can type this into the chat, it is daretoleadworkshop.eventbrite.com. daretoleadworkshop.eventbrite.com, and then you can use the code DARETOLEAD10 and that will give you 10% off of the early bird pricing that's still available right now. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Yvonne, I believe it is, to open up for any Q&A that we have tonight.
Thank you, Joni. That was great, amazing, inspiring, as I knew it would be. The best dinner conversation I've had in a very long time, so we appreciate you. We just have a few moments for questions, so a couple of questions. If you have anything pressing, if you wanted to put something in chat and you want me to, you know, vocalize it or verbalize it, I'll gladly do that. Although that goes against using your voice, but whatever gets us through this process. Any questions for Joni?
And if you want to share or two verbally, you can use the raise hand or raise your hand and we'll call on you. I'm going to stop sharing just so I can allow everyone's video to be seen when we open up for this.
Thank you. Questions are not required, but they are welcome.
To say you were incredible, absolutely amazing.
Oh, thank you so much.
You were fantastic. I thought my brain was on overload, but you were worth every minute.
I know it is, you know, every time I get to talk about it is just as much a gift to everyone else as it is to myself, because I have long used Brené Brown's work for my own personal and professional growth journey. And so it's not lighthearted, it's heavy, but what we've been experiencing is really heavy. And quite honestly, we've been experiencing this heaviness long before now. We just haven't acknowledged it and we haven't talked about it. And we have to have these conversations in order to be able to get to a place where everyone is using their voice for good.
Absolutely. And I love your definition of courage, but you are amazing. Absolutely incredible.
Thank you so much.
And I love your dog.
I love her too.
Any other questions or comments?
Yvonne, there's one in the chat box.
One in the chat box. Thank you. So Joni is asking, what is the reaction of young people to these lessons?
So it's interesting that you ask that, because this 2-day program, we actually ask that you be at least 18 years of age or older to go through it. However, I want to make the caveat that Brené, in her giving spirit, has also created a program called Daring Classrooms that is available to the education industry at no charge. There's tons of resources. If you go to the Dare to Lead Hub, you'll be able to click on Daring Classrooms, and there's lots of free resources there that teachers are able to use in their classrooms with the students. All right, so the book may be a little bit deeper, but she has created, because you can't start too early with this stuff, right? And so there are some resources out there that support that for the Daring Classrooms. And she did not want, budget or dollars to get in the way of that being shared. And I have actually had the opportunity, I meant to mention this earlier, not about the education industry, but also about the faith community. I actually had Reverend Doug Dewar, who is with the Unity Church. He went through the January program, and I just had a conversation with him the other day, and he said, I have the clear as kind, unclear as unkind on my whiteboard, and he does a lot of conflict resolution with congregations. And so as a mediator, and so he's certainly using these skills. But with the education industry, I have actually had the opportunity to work with a couple of principals and their dean team on offering them this work. And I heard from one of the principals the other day that they've actually started modifying the way they interview teachers and bring people on board, given diving into this work.
Joni, there's a question coming through chat, and we'll probably have to make this the last one. What if you can't narrow down to 2 values? What does that mean? Does it mean you just need to really focus and dig in and come up with 2, or is there an opportunity to have more that are priorities for you?
Yeah. So,
Joni, I think the follow-up is maybe, is that part of what it's a forced choice exercise as well? Is that part of what you're doing too with that?
Yes. So you want to set yourself up for success, right? To actually be able to live into these values and to operationalize them, rather than them to be, words on a paper or something that you see in a frame. You're actually living these out. So if you have 10 of them, that's going to be a little bit more difficult to live out every day and be that filter to you. So narrowing down to 2 is to help you really go deep and go within to identify, this is me, and this is the pillars that I rely on for decisions that I'm trying to make, for tough conversations. When I get in that dark place, this is the light that helps me see my way out of the tunnel.
Joni, we actually do have one more question. It's from Jay. Jay, what's your question?
The square squads are intriguing to me, and I'm wondering, do you believe that you should have one square squad, or should you have different square squads for different situations? It seems to me like, there may be different reasons, and this is a very interesting process for me. Mm-hmm. And I'm surprised, now that I go back and look at it, I'm kind of surprised at some of the people that I put on my.
Sure. Yeah, most of the time when we dive into this in the workshop, the debrief is, what did you learn about yourself from the names that you wrote down? And so that's a good question. And you know what? I would say that this is your square squad. So if you feel like you have different folks that are confidants that you rely on under different circumstances, then by all means have multiple square squads. But again, it's kind of like the values. It's a 1 inch by 1 inch square sheet of paper, because if you really and truly think about it, when you go to these folks, you've got to have that trust. It's someone whose opinion you value, someone who is able to be that mirror for you whenever you can't see what it is that you need to see, and you allow them to do that without getting to a place where you're not going to use your voice for good, or maybe if you don't use your voice for good, they're going to forgive you and stand by you and love you anyway through that process when it gets in the messy middle. So I don't know if that was helpful or not, but again, and we're making a lot of decisions about ourselves here. And so that's why we've just had, 40 minutes here. So this is, this starts here, but I invite you to continue this and reflect and process when we leave here tonight.
Well, Joni, thank you again for being here with us tonight, for your teachings, your lessons. We appreciate it. And hopefully everyone will decide tonight to rumble with vulnerability, live into our values, brave trust, and I love the last one, learn to rise. So thank you. And Kim, I'm going to turn it back over to you to wrap us up and close us out.
Great. Thank you very much, Yvonne. And thank you, Joni. That was wonderful. I think those are great lessons to learn for our next dialogues, because these were just basic skill sets for doing dialogue well. So thank you for that. In conclusion, I just want to thank all of you for participating, whether this was your first time or you've been to many of our events. So thank you so much. And specifically, I want to mention our Board Chair, Jay Harburg, thank you for being with us, our CEO and President, Martin Kaminsky, and our other IM board members who've attended with us tonight, Mr. Nazir Charayanya, Charlene Chuang, Scott McMillan, Shaheen Tavakoli. Thank you all for being with us tonight. We really appreciate your support for the work that we do. And also I want to support my colleagues in the Department of Interfaith Relations and Community Partnerships, which are Jody Bernstein, Reverend Greg Hahn, and Jet Phillips. And most importantly, our chair, Yvonne, it's been great working with you. And thank you so much for connecting us with Joni and sponsoring this. And all of these people that I've just mentioned, they have helped IM do so many things, specifically during this time of COVID. Just want to mention a few things that IM has been involved with the community during this time, helping faith leaders and faith communities. You are familiar with Meals on Wheels, and just know that we've continued to feed over 5,000 homebound seniors, over 60, and people with disabilities, changing from serving hot meals daily to serving frozen meals weekly to ensure the safety of our vulnerable seniors and our staff. We also call on these seniors regularly during COVID so they can hear a familiar voice, and we can provide that loving and caring attention that they are so used to from our drivers who usually come in person. We continue to resettle refugees and help our clients who have lost jobs with employment services and rental assistance. And we continue to help refugee women who are part of our Women's Empowerment Group to stay in touch, reduce their isolation, and stay healthy. And through the IRCP department, we have hosted community vigils offering hope and strength, co-sponsored COVID-19 briefings for faith leaders, nonprofit leaders, and Spanish-speaking communities. We've pivoted our dialogue programs into virtual opportunities like you've enjoyed tonight, so we can continue to engage with the community in important and meaningful communication and interactions. And lastly, through Volunteer Houston, we've helped hundreds of nonprofits pivot from person to virtual volunteer projects. We set up a virtual volunteer reception center focusing on COVID-19 needs, as we are charged by the county to do so during these disasters and stay connected with thousands of volunteers and nonprofits to help transform our community through volunteerism. And these are just a few highlights of what we've been working on during COVID and always here at Interfaith Ministries. And lastly, I'd just like to extend an invitation to all of you to our next event, which is the last program in our summer series called Vital Conversations with Our Community. This event will be hosted and moderated by Impulse, which is our young professionals group. Join us for conversation live on Facebook or via Zoom with these young leaders of our community as they discuss their dreams for a more just and equitable society. Register on our website at imgh.org and be inspired by a new generation who are poised to make lasting and meaningful social and economic changes for our greater community and world. To support this work and the event that you have experienced tonight, we rely on your donations. So you can see the donation link there in the chat room, and please feel free to support us in any way you can so that we can continue these great programs. We just appreciate all of you tonight. Have a wonderful evening. And lastly, we just want to say good night, and we want to recognize those in our Hindu community who are celebrating the festival of Janmashtami, which is recognized around the world to celebrate the birth of the God Lord Krishna. To learn more about Hindus of Houston, please go to their website at hindusofhouston.org. Thank you very much, everyone, and good night.
Good night.